Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are attending from. So, we'd like to welcome you to the webinar today. And, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So, what I'll do is I'll try to do the introduction part now, and we'll wait for some more participants to join. And then, in few minutes' time, we can start.
Definitely.
Definitely. So, thank you very much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and being the guest speaker for today. And I can say from all of the participants that we're pretty excited about the topic and the webinar today. Uh, so to introduce you, Ma'am Srimati Narasimhan, she is the senior speech pathologist and audiologist working at Moet International Hospital in Chennai. So the department is Center for Hearing and Communication, Center for Hearing, Communication and Swallowing Sciences. So her area of interest are adult language, cognition and communication disorder, neuroimaging, neuromodulation, and dysphagia. So she's been associated with multi-speciality hospital in Chennai with everyday interaction with varied population and specialties. She's also involved in neuromodulation for deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, spinal cord stimulation, and active interdisciplinary team member of Neuroscience Board at Moet Hospital. So her research includes uh, upcoming research interest in area of neurogenic GI disorder, dysphagia, molecular imaging in Parkinson's disease, and cognitive disorders. She's been invited speakers at national workshops and conferences. She has also conducted pre-conference workshops on neuroimaging in ISACON 2020 Chandigarh. So she's also Best Employee of the Year 2017 as awarded by Moet Hospital. We are very privileged to have you, ma'am, here. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yes, ma'am. I think we can start with sharing the screen.
Okay, sure. Yeah, is that visible?
Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Okay. So we'll wait or shall we start?
We can start, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vivek, for inviting me. And this is really a nice interaction that I'm having with all of you and your colleagues as well. And I must say that this has been one of the best organized webinars that I have come across, although I've done very few in the last few months. And when Kranti, one of your colleagues, approached me, she told me that neuroimaging would be of a great topic for me to speak because I think it's one of those upcoming things, especially for speech pathologists. Not many of them are into neuroimaging, although we've heard neurologists and other professionals speaking about this. So I think from an SRP's perspective, we should understand what exactly happens before you start seeing the patient. So today's topic will be focusing exclusively on stroke. And we were just discussing that probably in the future, if people are interested, we can think of taking it forward and having part 2, part 3, part 4s of different areas, So the first thing that I would want to tell you, I hope the technicalities is fine. You were able to see my slides?
Yes, ma'am. We can see.
Okay, great. So the first thing is you are trying to see. I mean, when you see a patient who has recently suffered a stroke, you want to know which part of the brain has suffered the stroke. So when you want to see the brain, you use some modality that can be a structural imaging modality or a functional imaging modality. What is the difference between these two is that structural modality will identify abnormalities such as stroke, bleeding, or tumors. It will just tell you about what is happening with respect to the structure. And functional imaging tells you about how this structure is affecting the functionality of the brain. So in case of a malignancy, it can cause a lot of disruption in the white matter tracts or some sort of a degenerative disorder which can devastate the brain tissue, and then some cognitive issues like dementia or Parkinson's disease or frontotemporal dementia, which can degenerate the brain cells. So the basic unit of our brain or the basic unit of our nervous system is a neuron. So combination of neurons only form the nervous system. So if you see, you have the cell body here, and then you have the axons, and then you have the dendrites. So each of these appear different based on what is the composition of this. So that's how it reflects on your brain. So when you see a post-mortem brain tissue, this is how it appears. So you have an outer covering like this, which is slightly dark, and an inner covering which is slightly bright. So this outer covering, or your sulcus and gyrus, is nothing but your cell body, and the inner covering, which is nothing but your white matter tracts, are nothing but your axons and the dendrites. So your axons just combine themselves because nerves are just tightly packed inside the brain. Wherever the axons are there, they form the tracts. So if you see on an MRI, it appears gray, and then it appears light gray, dark gray and light gray. So the dark gray is nothing but your gray matter, and then the light gray is nothing but your white matter. So if you should think, I mean, you should register in your mind that your cortex or the gray matter is nothing but the cell body, and then the white matter tracts or the dendrites appear lighter or look white. Okay. So why you want to do the imaging? Because you want to know what is happening when somebody is aging, when somebody has a neurological illness, when somebody has a psychiatric illness, or somebody has suffered a brain injury. What exactly is happening inside? You want to know whether this patient has suffered a fracture, whether this patient has suffered a bleed inside the brain, has the blood-brain barrier been broken. So you want to know these things. And then you also want to know, in case of specific cognitive processes, what is happening with respect to if there is a disease that is present, and if there is a disease that is present and is it progressing, and what is the treatment. And you also want to identify which are the subgroups which will come for treatment, and which are the subgroups which should be divided for prevention therapies, which can be most effective for them. And you also want to know what are the individual differences. What is the difference between one stroke patient and another stroke patient? What is the difference between one trauma case and another trauma case? And you also want to know what is the severity of this and how it is going to progress. Since this particular talk is focusing more on stroke, so in stroke, what are you focusing on? Why do you want to do an imaging? You want to, first thing is, you want to identify whether the patient has suffered a stroke or not. Okay. And if the patient has a stroke, you want to know what is the extent of stroke. To what extent, how severe the stroke is. And you also want to know where is the stroke located, or where is the infarct located. And then we all know that stroke is divided into ischemic and hemorrhagic. So you call cerebrovascular accident ischemic CVA or a hemorrhagic CVA. Ischemic means it's because of a block. Hemorrhagic is a bleed. Okay. And then you want to identify what is causing the stroke. You can't just say, okay, this is the stroke, let's just treat for the stroke. The neurologist will not look in that manner. They want to know what is causing this. Why has this patient suffered a stroke? What is the underlying issue? So is there a problem in the vessels? Is there a problem in the artery that is supplying the brain? Is there a block in that? So to identify, and where is the block, to locate, and where is the occlusion? If there is a block, where locate where it is, and what is the status of occlusion of vessels, or is there a cut in the cutoff of blood vessel? They want to identify these things and accordingly plan the treatment. So this is just a brief video. So if you see in this, you have several blood vessels in the brain. The blood vessels basically originate from the heart, that every one of us know. So these blood vessels, what they do is they supply blood to the structures in the brain, that is nothing but your brain tissue. So if anywhere there is a block in the blood vessel, it causes an infarct, and then it injures that particular region or tissue and deprives that region from getting enough blood and oxygenation. So what is the role of these blood vessels? These blood vessels, if you see here, this is your is the pointer seen. This is the common carotid artery, okay, and then you have the internal carotid artery, the bifurcation at this point. This is your internal carotid artery, and then you have the external carotid artery. The internal carotid artery goes into the cranium and then supplies the brain. The external carotid artery goes out of the cranium and supplies your face and neck muscles. Okay, so and then you have the, at the back you have the vertebral artery here, which combines at the level of the brainstem and then forms the basilar artery and then divides into posterior cerebral artery. The internal carotid artery is one major artery which basically divides into two other major arteries, which is nothing but your MCA and ACA, middle cerebral artery and then your anterior cerebral artery. So these blood vessels, basically they just let the blood flow so that the tissue gets enough oxygen and then enough glucose for the nerves to keep conducting signals. So the functionality depends upon oxygen there. When an ischemic stroke happens, there is a small plaque. It's called an atherosclerosis plaque. So that plaque either travels through the blood vessel and goes and obstructs. So if you see here, it's going and obstructing here, or the damage to these blood vessels can create this kind of a stenosis. So the vessel wall becomes stenosed. So because of that, the blood flow is cut. So this is a plaque which is here. So it is called as a thrombus. So this thrombus just blocks the blood from flowing into this particular artery, leading to damage of the tissue in that region. So where does this originate from? It can either originate inside the cranium or it can originate from the heart, because your heart keeps pumping blood. If there is a small thrombus created inside the heart, some people with cardiac issues, they can have a plaque inside the heart. That plaque, it's called as an emboli. Inside the brain, it's called as a thrombus. If it's from the heart, it's called as an emboli. So if you see cardioembolic stroke, that means the origin is from the heart. So it travels up and then it goes somewhere wherever there is a narrowing of the blood vessel. You know, it's not like the diameter of the blood vessel is going to be the same throughout the brain. Wherever the blood vessel may become smaller, it goes and blocks there, and then it causes damage to the tissue in the surrounding region. So what we need to understand as speech pathologists, what is the pathophysiology, what exactly happens when it happens, and what is it that the neurologists try to do. So before you see the patient, these are the workup that the neurologists are doing, and then only the patient is referred to you. So two things, if you need to, understand what is exactly happening, you need to know that the region or the ischemia that is created because of a thrombus and blood clot and reduced blood supply to that particular region. So depending upon the region, depending upon the blood vessel that is supplying that particular region, based on that the infarct develops. When the infarct is developing, one region or there is a smaller region where the infarct begins from. Okay, so that region which is destined to die, you know, that particular region which is destined to die is called as the ischemic core. So this is the region which is the core, that the vessel supplying this particular region has been disrupted. So because of that, the core or that particular brain region has lost its tissue. And then after that, there is another region which is surrounding this area. So whenever a stroke happens, the oxygen supply to the brain or the particular region which is supplied by that particular blood vessel is reduced. So because of that, that particular region becomes damaged. But what exactly happens is the surrounding regions or the surrounding blood vessels will try to compensate for the loss of this oxygen. They will try their best. They will try their best to give oxygen to that particular region. But when they are not able to perfuse enough, when they are not able to give that much of blood, they lose. So this region which is surrounding the region of core is called as the penumbra. This region of penumbra is actually salvageable. So this is what the neurologists try to do. If a patient goes to the hospital within 4.5 hours to 6.5 hours, you know, that's called the window period. So if they go within that period, they will not be able to restore the brain tissue which is lost. They will try to restore the tissue which is at risk for infarction. Okay. And so if you see in this image on the right side, this is the core, okay? And then the surrounding region, which is at risk for infarction, has been restored. There are some methods called as tissue plasminogen activator, or it's also called as thrombolysis. So if you hear the term thrombolysis, that means you should understand that the patient has undergone an IV medication which will try to preserve this penumbra region. So an IV thrombolysis is considered only when they see a penumbra, because if there is no penumbra and then if they still do the thrombolysis, there are chances of bleeding inside the brain, because whatever is lost, whatever is dead, beyond that if you try to push, it can bleed inside the brain. So how are we dividing the stroke, or how are we dividing the classifying the stroke? You classify it based on anterior circulation and posterior circulation. So all of us will be familiar with this figure, which is circle of Willis. So I already showed you in the video. So you have the internal carotid artery here. Actually, this video is a two-dimensional this figure is a two-dimensional figure. So this is the internal carotid artery here, which branches out into middle cerebral artery and then the anterior cerebral artery. So we all know that the middle cerebral artery is the main region which is supplying all the language areas. And then you have the anterior cerebral artery, which is supplying the frontal brain. So the inferior frontal gyrus and then the superior temporal gyrus, Broca's, Wernicke's, and then the angular gyrus, supramarginal gyrus, all of that is supplied by the MCA. And then you have the vertebral artery, which is at the posterior end, which combines into basilar artery and then gives rise to the posterior cerebral artery. So if it is anterior circulation, that indicates either it's ACA or MCA only. It cannot be PCA. Okay. Posterior circulation. You hear the term posterior circulation stroke or a vertebro-basilar insufficiency. That means it is the PCA and the basilar involvement. That is the brainstem involvement. So PCA basically supplies the occipital and then the brainstem region. ACA and MCA supplies the frontal, temporal, and the parietal region. So three things I want you all to remember now, because we have some evaluation coming for you. I want to leak one question to you. Otherwise, Bibek is going to be very strict. So anterior circulation stroke, that is nothing but anterior cerebral artery infarct. If you see this particular region, they will have a both the leg weakness. Okay, we would have heard of hemiplegia, but in these cases, there will be paraplegia. That is both the leg weakness. Hands will be perfectly fine. And you will not see aphasia in them. You will rather see more of behavioral differences and cognitive impairment and apathy. Okay. And then if it's MCA involvement, middle cerebral artery involvement, you can see dysarthria, you can see aphasia, you can see hemiplegia, severe hemiplegias. Okay. And if it's PCA involvement, that is posterior cerebral artery or posterior circulation stroke, what is otherwise called as, it can present with vertigo, altered sensorium, sometimes in some cases hearing loss, ataxia, which is gait ataxia, dysphagia, and sometimes even dysphonia. Okay, so if somebody comes with posterior circulation stroke, or if somebody comes to you with acute onset vertigo and associated with gait issues, the first thing that you need to suspect, rule out, is a posterior circulation stroke, and then comes peripheral vertigo. Okay. So when the radiologists try to describe a stroke, they will try to locate the structure, as in they will say a frontal lesion or a frontal infarct or this temporal infarct or a superior temporal infarct. They will try to locate the lesion as per the location. But when neurologists describe, they are more concerned about the blood supply or the vascular supply. So when you see the neurologist summary, it typically involves left MCA CVA or left MCA infarct or left corona radiata infarct, left ACA territory infarct. So they will specify based on the territory. So if you see, the two things that we are going to cover today is structural imaging, which is mainly of choice in cases of stroke. So the one thing will be CT and the other will be MRI. So we all know that CT basically involves the principle of X-ray. So you put the patient inside the gantry, you pass some X-rays through the region of interest. It can be the head, it can be the abdomen, it can be the hand, it can be the leg, wherever the region of interest is. The amount of X-ray that is absorbed and the amount of X-ray that is passed, that's what is measured. So the density of the tissue passed by the X-ray beam is calculated as the attenuation coefficient. So how dense the tissue is. So if you consider in the brain, the skull, which is the bone, you know, it's highly dense. So the X-ray does not pass through it. It just gets absorbed. Okay, there is attenuation happening when there is bone. But on the contrary, if you see air, which is very, very lightly dense, you will see that the X-ray is easily passing through, and that's why it appears dark. So based on the density of the tissue that you're examining, the color changes on the CT scan. So that is where we need to be interested. So when I told you in the beginning, gray and the white matter, if you see the gray matter consists of lot of cell bodies. So cell bodies are very, very dense. So that's why it appears slightly lighter when compared to a white matter. White matter is less denser, okay, because of its content of fat. Fat is less denser. And then if you see the CSF, it is again very, very less dense. It's almost equivalent to water. In cases of an edema is nothing but again collection of water molecules. That's why it appears slightly brighter than CSF. So this is how you have to note. So you just need to remember that bone. If you see something very white on a CT, remember that it's the bone, the skull. And if you see something dark in between, according to the region, you can think that it is the CSF. Air inside the brain is very, very rare, so you cannot see air. And the gray and the white matter. Gray matter is nothing but your cortex. So cortex is nothing but your cell body. That's why it is dense. So it appears slightly brighter on the CT scan than the white matter. So if you want to interpret how a CT scan looks, so your right is the patient's left. You're looking at the image like in a selfie mode. Okay, so when you take a selfie, your sari pallu is on the opposite side. If you have the habit of wearing your sari pallu on the left side, it looks like as though you're wearing it on the right side. So your right hand is the patient's left, and then the topmost portion is the anterior portion. The bottommost portion is the posterior portion. So there are two windows on a CT scan. One is the brain window and the other on the right side is the bone window. So brain window, you can see the brain tissue. On the bone window, you cannot see the brain tissue. You will only see the bone, like the mastoid. This is the mastoid here. And then this is the sphenoid. Then this is your pituitary fossa. So in this, it is divided as cranial fossas. So this is specifically of surgical importance. So anterior cranial fossa approach or middle cranial fossa approach, posterior fossa approach, all that is of importance. So like I already told you, gray matter appears slightly lighter when compared to white matter. So this is all gray matter here on the side, and then your white matter is inside here. And then just a few of the which I would like you to note is, this is your lateral ventricle. So we have 3 ventricles inside the brain, 2 lateral ventricles on either side, and then 1 third ventricle, and then the 4th ventricle. So if you see here, the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle is seen here, and then the posterior horn, or it's also called as the frontal horn and the occipital horn. So based on the location. And then adjacent to the anterior horn, you have the caudate nuclei, then you have the globus pallidus here, and then the putamen here on either side. Close to the posterior horn, you have the thalamus. What is going inside between these two is nothing but your white matter tract, otherwise called as internal capsule. This is your lateral sulcus or the sylvian fissure. Along the sylvian fissure, this tree-shaped structure is nothing but your insular cortex. Insula plays a major role in speech and language. So why I came to this picture is, in case if you identify a stroke in any of these regions, it presents little differently. Subcortical strokes, subcortical ischemia is very rare, but you will see them. If it's a basal ganglia ischemia, then the patient presents with dysarthria and some probably a little bit of slow and Parkinson's like features. And if it's a thalamic ischemia, thalamic infarct, patient's sensorium always is very, very poor. Patient is drowsy throughout the day. Patient does not interact with you very well, but they are sleeping, their eyes are closed, but they may be speaking to you. You know, they may be giving you an appropriate response. They are predominantly dysarthria, probably initially in subcortical aphasia phase because they don't respond very well. Their sensorium, because thalamus is like the relay center, right? So their sensorium is very poor, or their alertness level is very poor. Usually seen in cases of ischemia with respect to subcortical region. So how do you differentiate the vascular territories when you see the brain? You know, you just keep two fingers in the middle. You come to one of those cuts where you don't see the lateral ventricle, you don't see the ventricles. So you're slicing the brain into different cuts. You're making the brain into small thin slices, like how you cut your bread. You know, you get the bread slices like that, and then you come to the area of your choice wherever you're suspecting. This usually happens when you see the film, or you have some communication system inside your hospital. So you even on a CD, you know, you can see that different slices are there, different regions of interest are at different levels. So when you come to the cut where you don't see the ventricles, in this cut, you keep two fingers, you keep both your index fingers at the center point. The region which is covering your index fingers is the ACA territory, okay? And then the region which is not covered by your index finger is all the MCA territory. The region which is covered by your palm or the fist, when you come to the brainstem level, that is your PCA territory. Because as you move up, your brainstem or the PCA does not supply the brain region. When you move up, it is only, your brain is predominantly supplied by the ACA. So how does an infarct look on a CT scan? An infarct on a CT scan looks like a dark, attenuated signal. So like I told you, the density of tissue. So in this case, because there is a lot of accumulation of water molecules, whenever an infarct happens, what happens is the surrounding tissues try to give them enough, surrounding blood vessels or the collaterals will try to give them enough oxygen. At one point in time, they lose. So what happens is the extracellular fluid travels inside the cells. So extracellular fluid is nothing but your water molecules. So when the water molecules go and travel and sit inside the intracellular region, it becomes less dense, right? So that's why it appears dark. So if you see something which is dark on a CT scan, you should suspect an infarct in a not in an intended area. So this is not an infarct here. This is like a CSF. So CSF is also flowing. So you need to compare the region of interest with the surrounding region. This is also CSF here. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is loss of gray-white matter differentiation. So if you see here, you're not able to differentiate. So here, somewhere here is your white matter. You see the gray matter here, right? So here I'm not able to differentiate the gray and, so that indicates there is an infarct. And then, so this is that of a chronic infarct. So if you see something just as dark as the CSF, which is adjacent to the region of interest, that means it is something very, very old. So something that is developing is just changing, okay? It's not very dark. It's just becoming slightly darker when compared to the surrounding brain tissue. So that indicates an infarct. And then you can see something like this, something very fiery and fiery inside the brain. So this indicates there is a hemorrhage. So I told you that CSF, I told you that anything that is dense inside the brain, apart from your air and water, it appears brighter on a CT scan. So blood is really denser when compared to your brain tissue and the CSF also. So that's why it's appearing so bright. Okay, so this is that of a patient with large acute infarct in the left temporal and parietal lobes in the MCA territory. This patient had Wernicke's aphasia. So I don't think I'll be able to finish in 9 minutes, so we may have to continue in the next session. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. So when we come towards the end of it, we can stop this and then
Hello, Vivek?
Can you hear me, ma'am? Hello? Can you hear me, ma'am?
Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Oh my God. Okay, so yeah, okay, thank you, thank you. I can't hear you. Okay, great, thanks, that's fine. So if you see here again, so you can note that there is a hemorrhage in this region. This is nothing but your thalamus region. So adjacent to the ventricle, you see this particular region, it's nothing but your thalamus. So a hemorrhage appears bright or white on a CT scan. Yeah, so again in this this patient had a left gangliocapsular hemorrhage. So one more thing I want to tell is hypertension. Somebody who has a high blood pressure, uncontrolled blood pressure, can have hemorrhages because of hypertension, which can happen in 4 places: thalamus, basal ganglia, pons, and cerebellum. So if you see a sudden sensorium decrease in sensorium with associated hemiplegia, loss of speech, and uncontrolled hypertension, you should suspect a hypertensive bleed. So this is a classic site for hypertensive bleed. So thalamus and the gangliocapsular, internal capsule and the basal ganglia is involved. This patient who had global aphasia, over a period of time, he became, at the time of discharge, he became dysarthric, and then he had severe dysphagia also. So if you note here, like I told you, there is hypoattenuating brain tissue, which is nothing but your infarct. So this is the region of cerebellum. So you see the cerebellum here, that's your midbrain here. So this is a bilateral cerebellar infarct. Cerebellar infarct presents with vertigo, ataxia, and severe vomiting also sometimes. So the next thing that we are of interest. So like I told you, we've been, we are trying to see where the infarct is, what extent it is, but we are also trying to look at what has caused it. So we have to do something called as angiography to understand what is the status of the blood vessels. So if you see here on this image, this is telling us that the MCA is cut off at this point itself. If you see on the opposite side, you can see that it's extending so well. So that is probably the cause for this infarct. So this is another important image for CT angiography. You can see the common carotid artery here, which is bifurcating into external carotid artery and internal carotid artery on the left side. But on the right side, I see that the internal carotid artery is cut at the origin itself. There is no internal carotid artery which is going into the brain. But still, if you see the beauty, the other structures or the other blood vessels which are inside the brain or the posterior circulation is trying to compensate for this. That's why you see the anastomosis happening, and it's still supplying this region, but still it's not sufficient to supply the MCA. ACA it is supplying, but it's not sufficient to supply the MCA. And then the next thing is your CT perfusion. CT perfusion will tell us about how much of blood flow or blood volume is there in the region of infarct. So like I told you, reperfusion therapy, your thrombolysis or IV TPA, it's otherwise called as, is nothing but reperfusion. You're trying to help the brain to perfuse. You're trying to help the brain to come back to its normal self and give enough blood so that it functions again. So in this case, you see that there is an acute infarct in the right MCA territory. So if you see here, this is a nice red image on the other region. So that indicates that there is enough blood flow and blood volume, but the region of infarct has got deprived blood flow and blood volume. So this differs between core and penumbra. One thing I want you to concentrate. So in cases of core and penumbra, core is the region which the damage has already happened. Penumbra is the surrounding region. So this pink region is the core. So in cases of core, the blood volume is low because that place has lost its blood supply. And then the blood flow is also very low because the blood supply is lost. There is no chance of blood flowing to other regions from that particular area. And the transit time, that is the region, the time it takes for blood to move from one place to another place, is very high. Very simple. One area which is blocked, a center of the city, there is a bus stop, that bus stop is closed, so you have to go through that area only to another area in the city. So the volume of buses going to that particular area is less because that area is closed, and then the number of people traveling through that area is also low, and then the time taken, because you have to take a different route, so it is very, very high. In case of Penumbra, that's the surrounding area. Because of that particular area's bus stop being closed, the surrounding areas, what happens is people are trying to take that particular area more, so the blood volume is very high, so people are moving in the surrounding areas more in number, and then the blood flow is very less because the number of people crossing that particular region is very less, and then again the transit time is high because that region is also at risk for infarction. Okay, I want you to remember this also. And we can also stage the stroke based on how it appears on a CT scan. So if it is an acute stroke which is less than 24 hours, you will see something called as edema, which is known as the cytotoxic edema. When water gets filled in, it's called cytotoxic edema. And then subacute stroke is between 24 hours to 5 days. So in that case, you can see that the stroke becomes little more aggressive. If a patient has got a stroke 2 days ago, you need to be really, really watchful because they may develop a hemorrhage. Any stroke can also become a hemorrhage because of the reperfusion which is trying to happen. In that case, the risk of herniation is very high and the patient's general status comes really, really down. So in case of chronic stroke, which is more than lots of weeks old, so there is loss of brain tissue, which is very, very comparable to the surrounding CSF. So it's called as gliosis. Yeah. Yeah. So applications of CT. So it gives us, and one more thing I want to tell is CT is the first modality of choice in cases of stroke, and we don't use any contrast when we are doing for screening for stroke. Contrast is used only in case when you want to do something special, like when you're doing an angiography, CT angiography, or when you're doing a CT perfusion, only then the contrast is used. Because contrast will enhance the region of interest. When you when you give a contrast, it's like a dye, like how we are doing fluoroscopy. It's like a dye along with the food you're giving it, so it goes and enhances. The same way through the IV modality, the contrast is given so that it enhances inside the brain. First modality of choice in case of ischemia and trauma is nothing but CT, and then it helps in identifying vascular anomalies in case if contrast is given. You can also use this in cases of tumors to identify specific site of lesions. And it is very widely used, and it's very inexpensive when you compare it with MRI. And patients also feel little comfortable because it consumes less time in comparison with MRI. But sometimes the iodinated contrast that we use can be allergic to patients, and since CT is very sensitive to bone, the bone window, sometimes the artifacts can make it very difficult for us to visualize the brain in proximity of a bone. So we'll move to the next webinar and then continue the MRI so that we don't break the sequence. We'll move to the next link so that I can share.
Yeah. Am I audible, ma'am? I'm not audible at all. What happened?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so now we have seen CT. Let's move to MRI. Okay, I hope it's clear. Is there any doubts? Just keep it for the end, okay? So MRI, you're subjecting the patient to a magnetic field. You have some hydrogen atoms in the body which are aligned in different ways. They're called protons. When you subject the patient into a magnetic field, these hydrogen atoms align in a particular straight line. And then when you introduce a radio frequency wave, these will again align into different angles based on what properties that they have. And then when you remove this radio frequency pulse, they twist and turn in different manners so that they realign themselves and then they come back to their resting state. This pattern is what is recorded as images on an MRI using the MRI physics or the properties of MRI. Okay, so if you see here, the main sequences or the main cuts that you see in an MRI is the axial, coronal, and then the sagittal. Axial is when you cut your brain in the horizontal fashion like this, and then coronal is when you cut like this, and then sagittal is when you cut from the sides. Okay, so this is axial, okay, this is coronal, and this is sagittal. So based on the properties of the radio frequency pulse, how frequently you apply and how the response comes out, you have two basic imaging sequences on an MRI, which is T1 and then the T2. The T1, if you want to differentiate between T1 and T2, you have to look at the CSF. In T1, CSF appears dark. In T2, it just reverses, CSF appears bright. So what is the basic property of T1 and T2? T1 is mainly for anatomical correlations, and T2, since it is sensitive to fluid like CSF, if you're suspecting edema, if you're suspecting some accumulation of fluid, like in case of stroke, in cases of tumors, it is very, very helpful. So if you see here, this is that of an image of a patient with right MCA infarct. So I see some accumulation of fluid here in an unusual place. So I understand that some fluid accumulation is happening. I want to rule out a stroke. I want to rule out a tumor. Based on the presenting symptoms, I will rule out a tumor and then I will say this is a stroke. Okay. So the next image of choice, which is very, very important for stroke, is DWI. That is nothing but diffusion weighted imaging. So when I told you that there are two things that you need to remember when a stroke happens. One is the term perfusion, another is the term diffusion. Perfusion is flow of blood. Diffusion is collection of water molecules. Okay. So if the flow of blood is cut, there is collection of water molecules. So flow of blood is cut, which is what you're seeing in CT perfusion. But in case of diffusion weighted imaging, you're seeing how much of water molecule is collected. So if you see here in this image, there is a huge infarct which is established. So if you see something so bright on a diffusion weighted imaging, just close your eyes and say that it's an infarct. So in this case, it's a left MCA infarct, okay, extensive infarct. So diffusion restriction, something I want to tell you. So if you see here, you understand that diffusion is happening, okay? There is collection of water molecules happening in this particular region. But you want to know how much of this is happening. This is what is calculated in these kind of images, which is called as ADC. So DWI and ADC. How much of diffusion restriction is happening? So if you see something hyper intense on DWI and hypo intense on ADC, which that indicates restricted diffusion. Something bright on DWI and dark on ADC is restricted diffusion. You can close your eyes and say it's a acute infarct. It changes when the infarct establishes, and then later on it changes. So just remember this. So now if you see here, this is another diffusion weighted imaging on the left side and ADC on the right side. I see a infarct on the temporal horn. Let me correlate on the right side with the ADC cut. So the region where the diffusion hyper intensity is happening, corresponding region is dark on ADC, which indicates restricted diffusion. Again, on the insula, the deep, the cortex inside the deep temporal lobe, you see there are small infarcts. The corresponding region is also dark. So this is called as diffusion restriction. So in the temporal horn, I would expect this patient to have Wernicke's aphasia. So this is a very, very important image which I want to show you. Again, in this case, if you see here, there is restricted diffusion because I see something developing here and corresponding region on ADC, I see that it is dark. But if you see the difference between the previous DWI and this, there is some difference. There you saw something very, very white and bright. But in this case, I see something little dark here. So that indicates that it's a developed infarct, which is not acute, or probably a hemorrhagic infarct. So infarct can be infarct or ischemic or hemorrhagic. So it can also become hemorrhagic slowly, or it can be a hemorrhagic infarct itself. In the beginning itself, it can be a hemorrhage. So I compare this with the CT scan. So when I see here, this DWI image looks like this. The corresponding region looks bright on CT. So confirming that it's a hemorrhagic infarct. Okay, it's not an infarct which is developed into a hemorrhage. How do I confirm it on an MRI? There is a special sequence for that. Just like T1, T2, DWI, ADC, there is another sequence called as the Swan sequence. So in that, if you see something dark, it's a angiography. Okay, in that, if you see something dark in the corresponding region, that means it's a hemorrhage. So if you are dividing a patient as stroke, okay, you want to know whether the patient is a hemorrhagic stroke or an ischemic stroke. If it's an ischemic stroke, then the treatment is different. If it's a hemorrhagic stroke, the treatment is different. Ischemic stroke, they go ahead with tissue plasminogen activator or thrombolysis if it's during the window period, and then assess why the ischemia has happened. If it's a hemorrhagic stroke, they will not do a tissue plasminogen activator, because hemorrhage is something which you want to rule out in the beginning itself. If there is hemorrhage, you will not do active intervention. It may require neurosurgical intervention. And I already told you that hemorrhagic infarct, or for hemorrhage, CT is the best modality of choice. Okay, when you compare it with MRI, one of the sequence, okay, along with DWI and ADC, which will confirm if it's acute, subacute, chronic. Along with that, if you want to rule out hemorrhage, you have to do one more sequence, which is called as the Swan sequence. All right. So if you see here, this is that of a same patient. So if I see on the coronal image, there is a temporal infarct. So I see that there is a accumulation of water molecules here. The same thing. So this is a very classic patient who has Wernicke's aphasia. So this is your lateral sulcus. Here is where your superior temporal gyrus is. That's exactly where the hemorrhage has happened. So he actually is still admitted in a hospital. So he has Wernicke's aphasia. Am I clear? Because there are going to be questions. So I want you to pay attention. Okay. So again, I repeat, CT, imaging of choice for differentiating between ischemia and hemorrhage, and more sensitive for hemorrhage. That is CT plain. Contrast, we will use only if you want to see anything wrong with the blood vessel, for which you will do CT angiography and CT perfusion if you want to know about core and penumbra. Okay, if there is penumbra, take them for thrombolysis. If there is no penumbra, no active intervention. All right, and then hemorrhagic infarct, it is very sensitive again with CT. If you are not able to do a CT, or if you have the facility for doing an MRI, you have they do an additional sequence called as the Swan sequence, which is exclusively talking about hemorrhages. So this patient is a classic patient for Broca's aphasia. This is again a DWI image. So if you see here, it is just brightening up so well. So this patient had a Broca's aphasia. And this is a left MCA massive infarct. So the extent of infarct is so extensive that initially the patient was so disfluent. He seemed to be Broca's aphasic, but over a period of time, he actually became so good that he became more severe dysarthria rather than aphasia. So you can also have something called as watershed infarct. There are certain regions in the brain which are supplied by both ACA, MCA, MCA, PCA, and the ICA directly supplying certain regions. So if you have shower of infarcts in the brain, it's called as watershed infarct. So this is involving anterior cerebral artery. This is involving middle cerebral artery. This is also involving middle cerebral artery. Why I am saying is because this cut is not anywhere in the subcortical level. It is slightly in the cortical level. So this is also involving anterior cerebral artery. If you see shower of infarcts, it's called as watershed infarct. So this patient had moderate dysarthria. So if you see here at the subcortical level, almost close to the lateral sulcus, close to the lateral sulcus, you see sylvian fissure. So you see a perisylvian infarct. So that's why this patient probably had a significant language issue. And here also on the anterior, close to the frontal, probably in the inferior frontal region, somewhere here. If you see here in this cut, you can see that this patient has had an infarct. So this patient had multiple infarcts, shower of infarcts covering different territories, MCA and PCA. No major vessel occlusion on CT angiogram, but he was global aphasic. So, and this is that of a classic image for a patient with brainstem infarct. I want to show you, this is pons. So pon, and then you see a hypodense region in the pons on a CT scan. Correspondingly, you see a hyperintense. This is not the same patient's image. I'm just showing you to compare how it looks on a CT and MRI. So a corresponding hyperintensity on the pontine region. So pontine infarcts can present with facial weakness and dysarthria, dysphonia, okay? Because pontomedullary junction, cranial nerves arrives, I mean like from 5 to almost 9, 10, 11 and 12, you know, pontomedullary junction, pons and medulla, all the cranial nerves arrive from that region. So you expect dysarthria, and some patients also may end up with dysphagia. So it differs from anterior and posterior also. So if you see here, this is classical of a patient with lateral medullary syndrome. So the triad symptoms of lateral medullary syndrome is dysphagia, dysarthria, extreme dysphagia, dysarthria and ataxia. So gait ataxia, dysarthria and dysphagia. So lateral medulla, you see, this is the DWI image, very hyperintense, and then on the ADC, it's correspondingly hypointense. So this is a T2 image. There is a hyperintensity here. This is a swan image. I see that it is dark. So it is indicating that it's probably a hemorrhagic infarct. So I am confirming with these things. I have to use all the images and then come to a conclusion. What kind of an infarct is this? This patient had severe dysphagia. He was on Ryle's tube and he had severe dysphonia. He had a unilateral vocal cord paralysis, and we had to keep him on Ryle's tube and extensive rehabilitation in terms of swallowing for this patient. So cerebellar infarct. This is the next patient with cerebellar infarct. So cerebellar infarct again presents with vomiting and dizziness, giddiness, ataxia. So dizziness, ataxia, vomiting. Do not just think about vestibular alone, peripheral alone. You have to think more to that. Okay, but these are of acute onset, along with slurring of speech. Sometimes it is not. So if you see here on the right, I see some diffusion restriction here, and then if I see correspondingly on another sequence, I see that it is brightening up. So when I saw the MR angiography, like we did CT angio, MR angiography, I see that one of the vertebral artery is cut off, probably indicating a dissection here. So vertebral artery, one of it should be here, and then it combines into basilar artery and then divides into PCA. So that is not happening. So in this case, this is that of a patient with caudate infarct. So caudate nucleus is over here, and then you have an infarct. They present with dysarthria. So on the right side is the DWI image. Correspondingly, there is ADC, restricted diffusion, on the left side image. So this is that of a patient with right MCA territory infarct. So this patient was typically showing symptoms of right hemisphere dysfunction and visual neglect, which is very, very commonly seen in the right hemisphere infarcts. So they try to ignore the anything on the left side, probably left side of the body. You keep the food on a plate. They are not able to perceive left side of the food on the plate. So they leave the left side of the food on the plate and eat only the right side. So visual neglect. And this is that of a patient with acute right corona radiata infarct. This patient also had moderate dysarthria. Corona radiata is nothing but the fan-like fibers, white matter tract, which combine and then form the internal capsule. Okay, so if you have anything on the white matter tract, you suspect mostly dysarthria. You will not see, you rarely see aphasia in those cases. Okay, so this again is a very comprehensive image. You can probably click a picture of this or screenshot and save this. So this is just going to tell you if there is a block in any of the arteries or anywhere in the circle of Willis, where can you expect the infarct to be? So if I go to the anterior cerebral artery, which is right on top, so I will see the infarct on the top of the brain somewhere here, or probably extending from the front till the back. If there is an MCA infarct, I will see that this particular region where you see the ventricles, because the region where you start seeing the ventricles along the lateral sulcus and then the Rolandic fissure, that's the central sulcus, is where the MCA is supplying. So you have different divisions of MCA also. And then very important to remember, thalamic infarct. So thalamic infarct, like I already told you, sensorium is very altered. They are pretty drowsy most of the time. So you may think, why is this patient always sleeping? Why is he not waking up? So it's because if thalamus is, the relay station is infarcted, this is what happens. So if you have a basilar artery infarct, which is the basilar perforator, small arteries affecting, so you can have an infarct on the pons. Then if you have the posterior inferior cerebellar artery infarct, it completely showers on the cerebellum. So this is a very important picture which you can just store in your memory. Anytime you see an image, all of these images show only DWI for you. So if you see a stroke patient, just go and review their MRI with DWI image. Only then you will have an idea of what is the extent and what to expect from that particular patient. So just as we did CT angiography, this is MR angiography. So we've already discussed. So in MR angiography, the same structures you're going to see. You will also assess the neck vessels, because you want to rule out, you want to know where the origin of the thrombus is, and then you will also see the intracranial vessels. So if you see intracranially, this is your ICA dividing into MCA and then all the nodules. Then it is dividing into ACA and all the nodules on either side, and then this is your vertebral artery combining to form basilar artery, and then supplies the divides into PCA, supplying the posterior circulation. So like we have already discussed, ACA territory infarct. So if you see on the left side, the the ICA on the right side of the patient, okay? So on the right side of the patient's image, if you see, the ICA is dividing and then forming MCA, but I see that the ACA is dividing, but there is a cutoff. On the opposite side, you see that the ACA supply is very well. So this cutoff is what is causing this stroke. So I suspect, I presume that this patient would have had paraplegia and probably mute also sometimes. They are generally very less interactive or aggressive or apathic. They won't understand what the situation. They are disinhibitory type. They are not able to follow what you're saying. Cognitively, they are impaired. So just remember, ACA by both the legs and cognition, MCA, hemiplegia with language involvement, PCA is speech and swallowing with ataxia and vertigo. So this is another extensive MCA infarct. So if you see the corresponding MRA image, I don't see the ICA intracranially dividing into MCA at all. So the ICA is probably cut off at origin itself. So if you see here, the ICA goes anteriorly and then divides into ACA and then forms the MCA. I don't see the ICA intracranially at all. So this is why the extent of infarct is so much. So this is also a correlating factor. And you can also have a venous infarct. We have some veins in the brain which are draining the blood. So even veins can have infarct due to the backflow of blood. So if you have something called as the superior sagittal sinus, then the transverse sinus, sigmoid sinus, and the straight sinus. Those are the cortical veins. There are some deep veins also. Cortical veins can also end up in an infarct. And I would like to tell you that coronavirus has been it has been studied so extensively, and they are saying that coronavirus can cause cortical venous infarct more than ischemic or arterial infarct because of the cytokine release. It goes and releases itself inside the blood. The immune system gets compromised. It cuts off all the immunity boosters. So because of the release of the cytokine into the brain, it causes a lot of infarct in the venous system. So if you see here, I see in the posterior temporal region, there is a venous infarct. Correspondingly, like I already told you, DWI, if you see something dark, either it is a old infarct or it is probably a hemorrhage. Corresponding Swan sequence, it appears dark, indicating it's a venous hemorrhage. So venous hemorrhage basically presents with seizures, headache, and probably altered sensorium with weakness. Okay, and they have better recovery. Seizures, headache, first thing, again, venous infarct. So what is the difference, or what are the advantages and disadvantages? Already discussed. CT is simpler, cheaper, more accessible. Many places you have CT, and for bone detail, CT is always better, and it is tolerated by claustrophobics. And MRI does not have ionizing radiation, so it is slightly better, because MRIs can be done even in patients who are pregnant, but CT cannot be done in patients who are pregnant. And IV contrast is better tolerated in case of MRI, and MRI definitely gives you a lot of greater anatomical detail, and it is more comprehensive in terms of analysis of the pathology. So in a disadvantage again of CT is nothing but ionizing radiation, and contrast can sometimes be toxic for the renal. So if there are CKD patients, chronic kidney disease patients, they would not prefer doing an IV contrast in cases of CT. Rather, they would prefer an MR contrast because they are more slightly renal friendly. So IV contrast in CT is essential in case of tumor and CT perfusion and CT angiography. But in case of MR angiography, you don't require a contrast administration at all. So just that's what I want you to remember, and I wanted to highlight. So, but MRI is slightly costlier, and it is also sometimes difficult in cases of patients who are slightly unstable, and you may have to defer MRIs in case of patients with cochlear implants or cardiac pacemakers, because it can create artifacts. All right, so there comes the end of my presentation. So why we have highlighted these is we want to know what is happening, because we are worried about the behavior, but we want to relate it to the brain. So how do we relate it to the brain? By using images. So we also want to know what to expect from this patient. What is the extent? How much can we expect? How much can we push the patient? Why is this patient not cooperating so well? What exactly is the underlying pathology? What exactly has he gone through before? All these we need to understand for us to plan the intervention in a proper way. And we also need to counsel the patients and the attenders what exactly they can expect from the patient. If you show them the image and tell them that this is what is happening, this is why the language is affected, or this is why the speech is affected, or this is why he's having a swallowing difficulty, this is the region where the nerves come from, it gives a better, clear understanding for them also. And also for us to know, because it is just giving you so much of information about the patient. So for us to even see and understand and interpret all these things is very, very important, as we are more involved in understanding how brain is organized pre and post stroke, and in terms of how to analyze the plasticity in cases of patients who have suffered a stroke. I would like to acknowledge Kranti for this effort, because she approached me and she's tried to put me on to your awesome organizing team. Vivek has been wonderful in organizing this. I am so proud, and I'm really appreciating the efforts of Speech and Hearing Association of Nepal for all that they've been doing, because this has been wonderfully organized, and one of the wonderfully organized which has come across.
Ma'am, can you hear me now?
Okay, let me just check if I have done something to my audio.
because it seems others can hear me. Can I get into the chat?
So
Somebody.
I'm just stopping screen share. Oh, I think I muted because I
Oh,
wanted to talk when the video was going on. I'm really sorry, Vivek.
can you hear me now, ma'am?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
We are back. So that's everything we need. So, ma'am, it was absolutely detailed, and I think we could have even done like a presentation for each disorders or something like that.
Yes.
You were so thorough
Yes.
into that, and I think I mean, going back and talking about the radiological thing, it just brought me so much of my basic knowledge which I had before, and I think every one of
Wonderful.
us took us into like a bit of knowledge whatever you said today. And I've been getting few of the feedback saying like it's been so good and everything is so nice. So I thoroughly like to congratulate you on this
Thank
presentation,
you.
and
Thank you so much.
we are very
Thank you.
happy for the presentation. So to all the participants, what we will do now is I've shared a link on the chat section that is for the assessment. We have 10 multiple choice questions. What we would like you to do is click on the link, attempt the 10 questions, and we'll again share the results of that, and again have a discussion about each questions, where we went wrong, how much of correct responses we are getting, and we might
Yes.
make it even more elaboratively discussing session. So please go and click the link. I'll share the link again, and we will meet again. Click the same link for the webinar and come back for the discussion. We'll take a 5-minute break so ma'am also can drink water and join us back. Yeah. So take a 5-minute break, complete the questionnaires, and get back to us. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 5.
Okay. Just a discussion. So in case you're not able to fill anything, we will be discussing about that. So I have the images also. So don't worry. Just fill it up. Whatever comes out, it's okay.
Yeah, we will do that as much as possible, and everybody of us can give us an input. If you have any questions, we can even discuss further than that as well. So come back again in 5 minutes, fill the questionnaires, and then we'll see you in 5 minutes. Take a break. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a bit, ma'am.
Thank you. Only the clinical assessment we can say whether it is dysarthria or aphasia, but predominantly this is how it goes. So MCA, you can expect aphasia. Okay, if many patients, most of the stroke patients come up with dysarthria, but in case of MCA you can expect an aphasia, and in case of PCA you can only expect a dysarthria. You may not expect an aphasia in PCA. ACA, you can sometimes expect aphasia, and predominantly cognitive issues. Not necessarily always ACAs will have a language issue as such. Okay.
Yeah.
So we cannot really say if it's I mean, by just looking, saying this patient will have this, it's very, very difficult and very different how it presents.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for explaining that, ma'am.
Early onset VBI be seen on imaging. Yeah, so how, I mean, without symptoms, most of the times, only when patients have some symptom, we try to evaluate. Otherwise, we don't evaluate, no? So there are some Doppler studies, Doppler evaluation, which can tell about what is the extent of stenosis or what is the extent of if there is stenosis and how much of stenosis is happening. So based on that, it is an alarm sign for us. So based on that, we can see whether the patient has to be taken up for any intervention like stenting or coiling, or I mean stenting basically for insufficiency and other things. And we can't be doing MRA every now and then, no, to see. I can't go and get myself done, I can't, without me having symptoms, I can't go and see. But transcranial Doppler is one investigation which can tell us about the blood flow in the arteries. Thank you. Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
so we'll go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go.
Okay. So the next question was, what is the unit of MRI? So
Perfect.
almost 87% of them got it correct as Tesla. And I think
I didn't mention this at all. I totally forgot, but still people got it right. I'm happy.
That's good. So I think we don't need to discuss anything, but if you want, you can, I think, explain about Hounsfield unit, which generally is used in CT scan.
Hounsfield units is the units which is used in the CTs. Okay, so the grayscale that you saw, each of that grayscale scale. Air has got so much Hounsfield units, 0 Hounsfield units. And if it's bone, then it has got 1000 Hounsfield units. So the unit for CT, the attenuation scale, like how you have the magnetic strength as Tesla, the same way it is Hounsfield units in CT scan.
Yeah. So the next question is, 30-year-old female presented with sudden onset right-sided weakness of upper and lower limb, headache, blurred vision, and slurring of speech, gradually progressing to no word output, with history of uncontrolled hypertension. So what could be the cause? So
Yeah.
68%, so 32 out of them, so got it correct with hemorrhagic stroke, and few of them thought about tumor, which is 6%.
Yeah.
Ischemic stroke by 12%, and transient ischemic attack at 12%. So if you want to explain that once again, ma'am.
So I already told you that if there is a bleed inside the brain, it usually presents with a headache. So even when a stroke or a ischemia becomes hemorrhage, patients complains of headache. So when the patient is deteriorating inside the ICU with complaints of headache and GCS becoming low, you can suspect that the ischemia is becoming a hemorrhage. In this case, the catch is history of uncontrolled hypertension. So uncontrolled hypertension probably leads to hypertensive bleed in the brain. So that usually happens in the basal ganglia, thalamus, pons, and cerebellum. Transient ischemic attack, that means, okay, so that means the patient should have recovered. Okay, and it's for a brief duration and then he recovers immediately. So that's how transient ischemic attack presents. And tumor is probably one very good option which people have considered, because tumors can also present with very similar symptoms. But in this case, because the catch is uncontrolled hypertension, I would say hemorrhagic stroke.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. And I'd like to add, if it is okay, I'd like to add one more point, which I think everybody can consider when you're taking case history. So always they say like different types of hemorrhages are there. So subarachnoid hemorrhage, when it happens, they complain like worst headache of the lifetime. So if somebody comes with like worst headache and all the other symptoms like ma'am has explained, and you are supposedly going towards hemorrhagic thing. So this is one thing which I know. So
Perfect. That's a very good point.
so what is the ideal investigation of choice if you suspect of hemorrhagic stroke? So almost 56%, 27 out of 48 correct response. So they said non-contrast CT scan. Some of them has MRI with contrast. Some of them have considered MRI, and some of them have considered fMRI. So I think we might need to distinguish between the two once again. So,
yes. So yeah. So CT is very sensitive to hemorrhages. So if there is a hemorrhage, that means the density of that particular region is very high because the blood is accumulating. So whenever there is a density related aspect, you have to consider a CT scan. MRI, in that case, it can show up. So like we've already discussed, it can show up in its sequences. But if you want to differentiate immediately whether it is an ischemia or a hemorrhage, the quicker way and the discrete way of doing is a non-contrast CT scan. Contrast is in case of CT or an MRI is used only when patients have to be screened for tumor. So the tumor gets enhanced. The contrast goes and sits inside because tumors are nothing but it's very highly vascular, right? It has got a lot of blood vessels. So as the contrast passes through, it goes and accumulates inside the tumor and then it enhances. So MRI with contrast will not directly give us it's not the exact direct modality of imaging for hemorrhagic stroke. If you have a suspicion, first CT. Okay. And then we will move. So MRI, again, it will tell us, because people have taken that as an answer. It is not that it is not going to give us information, but it is quite time consuming. and you have to run so many sequences. The diagnosis is little time consuming. So non-contrast CT brain is the investigation of choice. And even if you go to the neurosurgeon, probably the neurosurgeon wants to differentiate, you know, because a hemorrhagic stroke can cause a lot of impact inside the brain. It can compress on the other side of the brain. It can dilate the ventricles. So because of that, the GCS comes down. So the neurosurgeons would prefer doing a CT wherever there is a bleed. Even in cases of trauma, if they do an MRI, they get really angry, because for them CT gives the brain and the blood in importance, you know. So that's why non-contrast CT brain. fMRI is more like a functional MRI. So you're giving them a task, and then you are trying to assess which region of the brain is getting activated. So when I give a task, and when that particular region of the brain which is responsible for that particular task gets activated, the oxygen in that region is more. So that is what is picked up by the fMRI. So if I'm doing a repetitive task or an articulatory task, the region which is responsible on the brain is getting activated, probably the parietal area, and then the precentral gyrus or the premotor cortex. All these regions are getting activated. Those regions will have more oxygen supply. That's what is getting picked up in fMRI.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for answering that, ma'am. And I think the other thing is what you pointed out during the presentation is, for contrast, they are going to be introduced with some chemical, and before they do that, they have to make sure that the kidney functions are right. Otherwise, they will get into complications. And
Yes.
the first line is non-contrast CT, and if they suspect anything is there, then only they go with the contrast to identify exactly what is the problem.
Yes.
So I think
Yes.
that's just to make sure that they understand that.
But in case of a hemorrhagic stroke, usually they will not do a contrast CT for even identifying anything, because hemorrhage either happens because of a trauma or because of hypertension or the CVT, I told you, no?
Okay.
So if these three, depending on the pattern, they will not go ahead with even CT perfusion or CT angiography also. Okay. So they will just remain like that, and then the treatment for the hemorrhage, and if the GCS drops, then the surgical aspects come into picture.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for clarifying that. So the next question is, 55-year-old female presented with hemisensory disturbance, ataxic gait, mild memory disturbances, dysarthria with repetitive speech. She was drowsy most of the time. She will respond with her eyes closed. What areas of the brain is involved? So 41.2%, I think it was a little bit difficult. So 41.2% of them got it right with thalamus. The next to that is cerebellum, which is 21%. I think equally to the correct answer. The wrong answer is with 21 number is cerebellum. So I think if you can differentiate between the features that happens in thalamus when there's a involvement in thalamus compared to cerebellum, that might help them to understand, ma'am.
Sure. So the answer, the clue again is hemisensory disturbance. Okay. So sensory is thalamus. Cerebellum does not have a major sensory role. Cerebellum is more to do with gait, motor, and motor coordination. Okay. So yeah, I understand. Balance problem is only because of ataxic gait, which can happen even in any other condition also. Again, mild memory disturbance is another clue here. Dysarthria, which is typical of repetitive speech. So usually thalamic infarct patients, they have the speech. So you ask them, what is your name? They say, if their name is Lakshman, they say, Lakshman, 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 Lakshman. My name is Lakshman, Lakshman, Lakshman. Yes, 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 yes. No. Like that, they have that kind of a repetitive speech. But ataxic gait alone cannot be taken into consideration for cerebellum there. And she was drowsy most of the time. She would respond with her eyes closed. Which area of the brain is involved? Because of the hemisensory disturbance, ataxic gait is one reason. So the right answer is thalamus here. Pons presents with, again, it can present with ataxia and one-sided weakness if the posterior pons is involved. And midbrain does not present with, midbrain, pons, and cerebellum, basically ataxia and one-sided weakness also. I mean, hemiparesis it comes up with. It does not come up with hemiplegia. So here, hemisensory disturbance is why thalamus.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next question is 65-year-old male presented with acute onset of loss of speech, inability to open the mouth, difficulty chewing, difficulty protruding tongue, swallowing. He was able to perform automatic movements like yawning, coughing. What is the likely diagnosis?
Wow, I'm glad there are
So
a few people who have answered right.
15% of them got it right with Fuchs-Savini-Mary syndrome,
Recent.
and the most confused one might be apraxia, with
Yeah, that's why
23%,
I put
and then
that.
myasthenia gravis, which is 27%. So I think we might have a discussion over here, ma'am.
Yes. So 65 years old male. So again, Fox-Chavani-Mary, the answer being right is because Fox-Chavani-Mary is something, a syndrome where a bilateral insular infarct. So if you see both can I share my screen, Vivek, if you
Yes,
don't
ma'am.
mind?
I'll
I just have the image to show them.
yes, ma'am. I'll just make you the host so you can. Yes, ma'am.
So So if you see here, the insula, both the sides is involved. Actually, here it's sequential because this is an acute one and this is an old one, chronic one. But both the sides are involved, and if bilateral insula involvement is there, you can see cranial nerve palsy 5, 7, 9, 10, and 12, and pseudobulbar effect also. So without any reason they will laugh, or without even any reason they will cry. They are predominantly mute, and there is an oral phase dysphagia because voluntary initiation is affected. But involuntary movements like laughing, crying, and automatic yawning are preserved. People should read up on this because this is very, very interesting syndrome. We have come across only one patient as of now. So that's the thing. And I just wanted to show you this bilateral thalamic infarct also. So this is a bilateral thalamic infarct. So this patient, if you remember that image that I showed you where which artery is supplying which region, so in that you will see that bilateral thalamic infarct in cases of involvement of artery of Percheron. So this patient was completely drowsy. He seemed to have subcortical aphasia, naming was impaired, but it was later on we understood that it was not like an aphasia as such, it was more to do with his sensorium as such. Okay. And this is one case of hypertensive intracranial hemorrhage. We've discussed about intracranial hemorrhage, hypertensive bleed. So this patient, such an extensive intracranial hemorrhage, the brain itself is swollen. If you see, this is all swollen fat tissues surrounding the brain, subcutaneous fat tissue. There is involvement of thalamus, there is involvement of basal ganglia, there is involvement of internal capsule. So this is gone to such an extent that it is pushing the brain to the other side. So the ventricle is just gone. This is called as midline shift. So if the GCS is dropping and this patient is going down in terms of his sensorium, and he is becoming very drowsy, and his condition is deteriorating, this is of neurosurgical emergency. So the patients will be taken up for a craniotomy, and then the hematoma or the hemorrhage is scooped and taken out so that the patient's condition improves. Okay. So you can share your screen. I will stop sharing. We can discuss about Fox-Chavani-Mary now.
Ma'am, just related to this question. So somebody, Rosa Rani, she has asked like.
Yes, perfect. Opercular syndrome. Yes, it's called frontal opercular syndrome. You're right, Roja Rani.
Okay. So I'll share my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next question is, what is meant by diffusion restriction? So 60% of them has got it right, by bright on DWI and dark on ADC. I think the most confused answer is dark on DWI and bright on ADC, which is just the opposite of it. So if you like to explain that, or I think it is self-explanatory.
So it's pretty straightforward. So bright on DWI and dark on ADC means restricted diffusion, means an acute stroke. So just keep that in mind. That's all.
Okay. So the next question is 52-year-old alcoholic present with history of persistent hiccup unable to swallow, excessive salivation with ataxia and slurring of speech. So where could the problem be? So at 54% of them, nearly 55% of them have got it correct as lateral medullary infarct. The most confused one is pontine infarct and perisylvian infarct with 9 and 10%. So do you think
And then somebody is told CB angle tumor also.
Yes, ma'am. So 4 of them, so 7.8%. So if you want to explain that once again, ma'am.
Yeah. So again, persistent hiccup because medulla, your swallowing center, and then your center for vomiting, your GI, all the efferents from medulla come to your GI tract. You have the dorsomotor vagal nucleus there in the medulla. Okay, so that supplies the GI, the enteric nervous system. So hiccup, unable to swallow, excessive salivation, ataxia, again, any brainstem basilar involvement, you will see ataxia or gait disturbance, and slurring of speech, lateral medullary. So because of persistent hiccup, excessive salivation, unable to swallow, think of medulla. Tumor probably, but it presents with associated vertigo, tinnitus, probably a little bit of hearing impairment also. So again, the history. Perisylvian infarct cannot be, because perisylvian infarct is more like an MCA infarct. So it presents with hemiplegia, language disturbance, or more speech disturbance. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So the next question is, 65-year-old male presented with deviation of angle of mouth and slurring of speech for brief period of 30 minutes 1 week ago, and MRI was normal. What is the likely diagnosis? So I think
I'm glad.
86% have got it right, and this is transient ischemic attack.
Perfect.
So some of them have little confusion with ischemia and encephalitis. So
Yeah.
do you think you need to explain? Or?
So the catch is brief period of 30 minutes there, and 1 week ago.
Mm-hmm.
So if he had ischemia, it would not be for brief period. And I don't think he would come like a later, 1 week later, saying that I have a deviation, or I mean, I had it probably. So encephalitis also less likely, because encephalitis presents with other associated symptoms.
Yes, ma'am. So the last question is almost a similar question like what we had in last week's webinar assessment. So, and we have the last week's guest as well. So if you want to interact with her, I can unmute her as well. So she's Sarah Rixby from USA. She works as speech pathologist in Pokhara, Nepal. So she's been in Nepal for like long time. So we had 2 webinars with her as well. So the visual neglect is most commonly seen in similar question, not the same, but similar question was there last week as well. So yeah, most of them have got it right with 57% of getting right, almost half of them. So the most confused one is right PCA infarct and right ACA infarct. So I think if you can just explain it a little bit.
Yeah, so PCA, it may not be neglect. If it's posterior circulation, it can be, it's called as anopia. Okay, because it involves the tracts, that's the optic tracts and all that. So homonymous hemianopia, or I mean, which is also little similar to our agnosia kind. There will be one part of the one side perception is lost. Okay, but in cases of visual neglect, it is to do with the cortical. So likely answer is right MCA, because of the cortical fibers, which is supplying, you know, our I mean, our right hemisphere has got its own role in perception and several other extra linguistic aspects. So with that, it is correlating well with the right MCA. I think we missed one question, Vivek. Ma'am, what are the possible pitfall while interpreting CT MRI that may result to wrong result? So one thing is we may miss out, because in CT, because it is very confusing at times. It looks very much like the surrounding brain tissue. Unless and until you keep repeatedly seeing, you may miss out a stroke. And initial phases, especially within the window period, sometimes it does not show up. Yeah, so that is one more thing that it is not establishing yet, but the patient presents with those symptoms, which is likely of stroke. So if the patient is presenting with the symptoms of stroke, like in terms of aphasia, hemiplegia, and their, weakness, aphasia, hemiplegia, basically speech, your, what is it called? Fast facial drooping, arm swing, speech, and time within that period, that indicates stroke. But CT is not indicative of stroke. It is likely for, it is likely taken up for reperfusion therapy. So in case of stroke, which is not yet established, you may miss out. And hemorrhage picks, you can pick up. A tiny stroke you may not pick up, and you may think that it is not a stroke. In MRI, since you have so many sequences, it is very unlikely that you will miss out on an MRI, unless and until it is so tiny, or probably it is you are not able to differentiate whether it is a tumor, whether it is a stroke. And if you're not able to differentiate what is the cause for it, so it is very unlikely, because MRI is more detailed than a CT. In CT, the pitfall is you may miss out on a CT. Sometimes you may miss out a stroke on a CT. So nowadays, all the neurologists, any center, they prefer an MRI. But if you want to differentiate ischemia and a hemorrhage, first choice is CT only. Okay.
Ma'am, there's one more question. I think we have missed that. So it's from Indra, who says, sometimes the symptomatology of patient differing from the imaging findings. How likely such scenario exists in your experience? Do we need to rely on clinical findings or imaging findings on such scenario? What are the technical factors that might make imaging interpretation difficult? Like you said, bone infarct in CT. So it's a pretty long question. So shall I send the same question to you? So I can just text you. I can just message you.
No, I can see the question. So
Yeah.
I will first answer the first part of the question. Sometimes the symptomatology of patient differs from imaging findings. Yes, very much. How likely such scenario exists in your experience? It has happened several times. So many of the images that I have showed you also, I have lots and lots more of images as well. You will be expecting an aphasia, oh, such an extensive infarct, oh my God, it looks so huge, but the patient will be sitting and talking to you. He'll be asking, madam, how are you doing and all. So it is totally different. And do we need to rely on clinical findings or imaging findings? It just goes hand in hand. So always don't go predicting something. Imaging is going to give you an idea, but don't just depend on that alone. You do your clinical part, but as a correlating factor, keep that, you cannot sometime before I mentioned PCA territory stroke or a cerebellar infarct, you may not see an aphasia in those cases. So you need to have a clear-cut picture of which area, what is possible. Bilateral cerebellar infarcts or bilateral pontine infarcts, it can be life-threatening also in some cases. So at what point in time you need to intervene, at what point in time you need to wait, at what point in time you need to just slow down, all those also you need to understand. And what are the technical factors that might make the imaging interpretation difficult? Like you said, bone infarct and CT. So most of the times you really need not worry. The reason why I am saying is you will also get the report, but don't rely on the report. Always take out the image and see and try to find it. And then you see, have I found this or have I not found it? Okay, is this something which I have missed? Okay, what is it that they are saying? Have they told something is there on the thalamus? Am I able to point out? Have I missed something on the basal ganglia? Is there an extensive infarct? Did I see the MRA? Was I able to make out that the blood vessel flow is cut off in this particular region? So CT, in fact, it all comes by experience, So over a period of time, first when you start seeing the images, you will get an orientation of how to look at them. And then you will start describing, then you need to understand which are the anatomical landmarks that you want to focus on. Especially for speech and language, we have quite a few of them. So locate them in all the patients that you see. Then after that, start looking at the disordered population. All the disorders in terms of infarct, in terms of hemorrhage, in terms of MCA, ACA, PCA, territory wise. So that's how you slowly come up with technical factors. By just looking at one single image, you cannot make out anything. So you have to have a series of things, series of sequences. First CT was done, then an MRI was done, correlate the CT and MRI. So it's like multiple things at the same time. Even on an MRI, T1, T2, then DWI, ADC, then the flare or the SWAN image, you want to correlate, you want to understand what it is. So that's how it goes on. And if you have the provision for doing little more detailed things, like you probably have a PET imaging, which you can do in cases of patients with dementia that you suspect, you can do a brain PET imaging, and then you can understand where the degeneration is happening and what you can expect. In case of frontotemporal, you're not able to differentiate between a Alzheimer's disease or a frontotemporal dementia. You need some imaging findings. You can always look for more things in that.
Thank you, ma'am. So we're running short of time again, but I think we will be able to answer one more question. And in the meantime, I'm going to share a link to fill the form so that we can send the certificates to all the participants. So the last question is there any common blind spot? So I think in general, I think she's talking about like it's from Prabhat Tawadi. So she's
Yeah, so again on CT, usually close to the bone, you may miss a hemorrhage also. If it's a trauma, it usually hits on the bone, right? So if there is a hemorrhage close to the bone, you may miss on that. So that's why you have to go to the subarachnoid space. So all that is a little more in detail. So maybe we can do it sometime later on. And common blind spot, apart from this, close to the bone window, yes, and anything within the ventricle. So if there is an intraventricular tumor which does not show up, it is just sitting inside the ventricle, but you see that the ventricles are just dilated and you see that there is a lot of CSF inside. So you may miss on that. So there is a sequence in MRI for that. So that way, specific to different populations, specific to tumor, specific to trauma, specific to degenerative disorders, it's little different for different things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, most of the questions are done. And I'd like to thank you again, ma'am. We're coming towards the end. So I'd like to thank you again.
I'm really happy about the interaction that I've had, and the initiative that everyone has taken to fill up all the questions and like being so interactive. It's a wonderful experience with all of you. I'm so thankful to all of you. Thank you.
And I apologize for the technical glitch I had in between, but we have gone through it. So I'm happy with that.
I have experienced so many times, once it so happened that I had to make people wait for 45 minutes because my laptop was just not cooperating. So it's okay, never mind. And just think of trying the Cisco WebEx, okay,
Yes,
next time.
I'll definitely do that. And I'll
Thank you,
be in
everyone.
touch with
Thank you for being so interactive.
I'll be in touch with you if there's anything we can discuss further, ma'am.
Definitely. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Kranti. Thank you,
Kranti as
Rashmi.
well.
Rajat. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Take care, all of you. Bye.
Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.